A single apple can spark a thought. I'm Edwin. What does it mean to win a war? Is it measured by destroyed targets, by dead commanders, by the number of missiles intercepted, or is victory something else entirely? Because today, both sides can claim success. The United States says it has crippled Iran's military capacity. Iran says it endured the blows, responded, and survived. So who is winning? Maybe that is not the real question, because wars are not decided by tactics alone. The deeper answer is found somewhere else in a strategy. Every war creates its own language of victory. From a tactical point of view, the United States appears to hold the advantage. Air superiority, precision strikes, high-value targets eliminated. On paper, that looks decisive. But from Iran's point of view, the picture is different. They were not erased. They answered back. Drones were launched. Missiles were fired. American positions across the region were forced to react. Even Bahrain, home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet, saw personnel withdrawn. And for the first time in decades, American military presence in the Middle East appears less immovable than before. So yes, both sides can say they are winning, but that is the surface of war. Because nations do not only fight for territory, or for assets, or for military advantage. They also fight for perception, for morale, for psychological ground. And sometimes that battlefield matters just as much. But beneath the visible conflict, another layer is taking shape. A strategic layer, quieter, deeper, and far more consequential. Because real strategy rarely announces itself. It moves underneath events, beneath headlines, beneath the noise of daily escalation. And when this war is viewed from that level, the question changes. Iran may gain something more important than a tactical success: control. Control over the Persian Gulf, control over the Strait of Hormuz, and above all, control over the movement of energy. That is where the real significance begins. Because Iran has already signaled something critical. If European oil tankers pass through Hormuz, they may no longer be allowed to use the US dollar. Instead, they may be forced to settle in euros. At first glance, that may sound like a technical adjustment. It is not. The immediate target is not Brent itself. The target is the dollar system behind Brent. Brent may still survive as the reference price, but it would no longer stand as the uncontested monetary center of the oil trade. And once pricing reference and settlement currency begin to separate, something deeper begins to crack. Benchmark power fragments, liquidity fragments, monetary control fragments. This is not just a policy move, it is an attempt to loosen the financial architecture that has governed energy trade for decades. And if that architecture weakens, the consequences will travel far beyond oil. Now step back even further, because this is not only about Iran, it is about the system that produced the modern balance of power. Over the last several decades, globalization reshaped the industrial world. Production moved, factories moved, supply chains stretched across continents, and much of that industrial depth left the United States. Manufacturing declined, strategic sectors became dispersed, critical capabilities were fragmented. Rare earths, pharmaceuticals, advanced materials. These were not just industries, they were forms of resilience. And as industrial capacity weakened, so did the ability to sustain prolonged conflict. Today, the United States still holds immense power, but power is not the same as production. Weapons are expensive, replacement is slow, supply is finite, and long wars, especially industrial wars, are no longer easy to maintain. That is not a rhetorical weakness, it is a structural one. Now look east. China and the broader Asia Pacific region have built enormous industrial capacity, factories at scale, manufacturing ecosystems, integrated supply chains. But this vast system depends on something fragile: energy. More than half of Asia's energy comes from the Middle East: oil, gas, and refined fuels. That means the region powering much of the world's industrial output relies on an external heart, and that heart beats through the Gulf. If that heart slows, the entire system feels it. Factories begin to falter, logistics tighten, production slows, supply chains fracture. This is not speculation. It is how industrial civilization works. Energy is not one variable among many. It is the precondition for all the others. And now the strategic logic comes into view. If you cannot restore your own industrial advantage quickly enough, there is another path. You target the conditions that support your competitor's strength. You do not immediately rebuild yourself. You destabilize the foundation beneath the other side. And the foundation is energy. If the Middle East becomes unstable, Asia's industrial core becomes vulnerable. Production falls, costs rise, employment weakens, fiscal pressure builds, and suddenly the balance of power begins to move. Not because one side has dramatically strengthened, but because the other side has begun to lose the stability it depends on. That is how strategic shifts happen. Not always through conquest, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes through disruption, sometimes through the slow erosion of the systems that hold power together. And this is why current events matter so much, because the targets are not random. Energy infrastructure is being hit: oil facilities, gas production, refineries, and even more critically, electric grids and desalination plants. That matters for a reason. In much of the Middle East, water is not simply available, it is produced, it is pumped, processed, and distributed through energy-intensive systems. Every cubic meter of water depends on power. So if power systems fail, water begins to disappear. And if water disappears, modern life begins to fail with it. Hospitals, cities, industry, daily life itself. This is where war stops being a military contest alone and becomes pressure against the foundations of society. At that point, collapse is no longer unthinkable, it becomes possible. And this is why the conflict may not remain contained. It is no longer just a confrontation between two states. It is becoming a regional gravitational force. Gulf states are being pulled toward it: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, each one tied to energy, shipping, finance, and security. And if escalation continues, the region may cross a far more dangerous threshold. Not a short war, not a clean war, not a war with a clear end point, but a prolonged, self-sustaining conflict, one that feeds on disruption, reproduces instability, and becomes harder to stop with each passing stage. That is when conflict stops being an event and becomes an environment. So now we return to the question from the beginning: who is winning? Perhaps no one, at least not in the way most people imagine, because this war is not only about victory, it is about restructuring the system beneath victory. Energy shapes capability, capability shapes conflict, conflict reshapes order, and once order begins to shift, the world that emerges afterward may not resemble the one that existed before. So the final question is not simply who wins this war. The real question is this: are these events isolated, or are they signals, early signals, of a deeper transformation already underway? Because if the foundation of the system begins to break, what comes next will not be just another war. It may be a systemic reset